Hi, my name is Bryndis Whitson, and you're listening to the Zebras to Apples podcast, the fun and fascinating stories of supply chain logistics. Today, we're sitting down with my friend Anna Murphy, and we're discussing politics. And you think politics, but this is a show about logistics and supply chain. What does politics have to do with that? But when you're looking at a campaign, when you're looking at a leader's office, when you're looking at organizing a schedule in general, it's all about logistics. How does that fit in? How do we work through a schedule? How do we make sure that we're going from place to place to place? And that's what part of our conversation is today, is really talking about how logistics is also in politics. I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. So we're here today with Anna Murphy. Welcome, Anna. And what we're going to discuss today is everything about politics and how it relates to logistics.
Thanks for inviting me, Bryndis.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your career history and where you've worked, where you've done, and then we'll kind of get into everything.
Yeah, my career history is quite diverse.
Mm-hmm.
I have had the honor and privilege of serving some incredible leaders in the political sphere, whether the Honorable Rachel Notley, the former Premier, the Honorable Carla Beck, leader of the opposition in Saskatchewan, volunteering on campaigns for former Mayor Jyoti Gondek, Brian Thiessen. And my 9 to 5 has varied. I got started in retail and merchandising and fashion and business, and was in that for a number of years, getting to work for remarkable companies like Holt Renfrew and Nordstrom, and got my start with Sears Canada and Lloydminster. And so my career has really spanned multiple sectors, but in the last decade, especially, and particularly the last 5 years, the focus of my career really has been on advocacy and community building and public service. And so that is a little bit about my career.
So you started in retail, and then you transition into politics. And I can see the similarities from retail into politics. I know it's more about passion, which is why you switched into politics, but I'm pretty sure that some of the things you learned within the retail environment probably helped you in the political world. But let's get more into your political conversation.
The reality is that my existence is political. I am a woman. I am someone who is transgender, and so my existence is political, and it always has been. And so that really is where that's what drove me into politics, because quite frankly, I didn't have a choice. When you are having to advocate to government to at that time, it was to bring back funding, and so as we grow older, as we mature, we discover more of ourselves. We learn more about who we are, and so the passion became less so about what ultimately seems like very, very trivial things now, like fashion and design and all of that. There is a place for that in the world, but with everything that's been going on, especially in the last 5 years, it didn't fill my cup the way that it used to.
Right.
And there was a need to get more involved, to speak out, to advocate, to do everything possible. So I would say, yeah, retail didn't exactly drive me toward, didn't lead me towards politics. But, I would say that, what I took from my experiences in retail and working in styling, working in service environments is again that sense of service.
Fully.
And so when you in terms of the roles that I have held, in whether it be on a campaign, whether it be a volunteer, whether it be briefly as a paid staffer, you're in service. You're in service to
Completely.
the elected. You're in service to the constituents that the elected serves, and you're ultimately in service of your community.
Definitely. And the one thing I've always kind of seen as someone who's also done staffing politically, there's a whole bunch of different pieces that are involved in that kind of area that we don't think of. Once we're involved in that kind of, political aspect, we see it. But from someone who's just observing it from the outside, we don't realize how much is involved when we're working for political leaders, because you have to always make sure that you're understanding not only the situation of whatever meeting they're about to attend, but where are they going? How are we getting to the next meeting? What's involved in all those different steps too?
Bryndis, it's a great question. What do you learn? And the reality is that, even for folks who have gone to school, who have went on to, study political science, until you are on the job, until you are
Fully.
doing the job, no one fully understands the complexities of serving in the role of whether you're on a campaign or working in the public service, whether, City Hall, legislature, House of Commons. And what it ultimately is, your job to do is to embolden and empower the elected that you are there to serve.
Yes.
Whether that is, whether they are a councillor, whether they are an MLA, whether they are a member of parliament, or, of course, these individuals can go on to have much bigger portfolios. So whether we're talking about a premier, whether we're talking about a leader of opposition, a mayor, a prime minister, a minister with a portfolio, parliamentary secretary. And so with that, there is there's the everyday, I think, as you mentioned, putting meetings in calendars and things like that. And that's to be expected. When you're in a role, which in my case was very much that of serving in a capacity of executive assistant to Ms. Notley, and as a tour officer, as someone who traveled with Ms. Notley and helped to coordinate and arrange both her day-to-day and as well as supporting the opposition caucus in the legislature and throughout the province. But you have so much more, and it really is both an art and a science when it comes to political staffing. You have to be able to, number one, you have to have some kind of understanding of politics and understand, the political climate when you are serving in these roles. And so, you have to be engaged. You have to understand. Again, you don't have to be an expert, but you do have to, you have to be able to read the room, as it were.
Fully.
And so you get into a place where it goes so much beyond just, putting a meeting in a calendar or, printing off speaking notes or whatever it is. And you really get into a place where you are helping them and those around them to have everything that they need in order to lead. And so whether that is working with, whether it's your comms director, your chief of staff, your policy director, your MLAs, your other MPs, there's a difference between party versus caucus.
Yes.
And so there is you're juggling a lot in your day to day.
Definitely. And when you're looking, I could go on about this kind of area, et cetera, but looking kind of at the tour perspective, because you were mentioning tour a few times. And can you explain what a tour is for just someone who doesn't know that? And then we'll kind of get in from there.
So tour is, it's not unlike the word, where you are touring around, whether it is in this case, you see it more provincially and federally because of the very real reality that those elected individuals have a very large area to serve.
Yes.
And when it comes to tour, you are particularly focused on the leader as well as the MLA. So you're really focused on, engaging and helping to move people around and to organize events and to coordinate stakeholder meetings and everything that goes on and goes into what you would require in order to do that, whether it's, venue or tech or accommodations, transportation and so on and so forth, working with, the other colleagues. So whether it's, other MLAs or other MPs and their teams and their offices. And so you're really there to, if you think of a musician when they go on tour,
exactly,
they go to many different cities because all of their fans want to see them and, engage with them and go out. And in politics, it's much the same, except our job in government, whether that's serving in government or opposition, both play a key role in our democracy, or whether it's on a political campaign, our job is to go out and connect with as many individuals, everyday, hardworking individuals in every community that we possibly can. Yes. And so the reality is that you need help when you're doing that, whether you're dealing with 80 plus candidates or you're dealing with 30, a 30 plus, caucus. Yep. Or even a 2-member caucus, if we look at our current federal electeds, and a caucus of 2, but both of them have high profile portfolios. We just saw a minister visit Calgary, so there would have been a lot of logistics involved with that around what she was doing, where she was going. Does she have everything that she needs? Everything from speaking notes to, transportation to and from and so on and so forth. We see the Prime Minister, visiting Alberta frequently because of the key role that it plays. And so there's a lot more logistics that go into that. You're dealing with security details. You're dealing with motorcades. You're dealing with, you can't just go anywhere. You can't just roll into a community with the Prime Minister of Canada. You have to. There's so many other pieces that have to be set up before then. Yeah, and it's not undifferent with a premier or a former premier, as the case was with me. So tour really is there to support all of those pieces, all of the moving pieces, and then depending on how the org chart is set up, you will see, and the persons, the electeds, executive assistant feeding into that, or separate. But again, both of these have to work in very close connection to one another. And so tour and the executive assistant to a leader again. And this is, something that the audience will most likely not know is, again, not every elected has a tour. That is something that is afforded to the entire group, again, caucus, and really focused on the obligations of the leader and of the whole. So if you have a leader doing a press conference, you will have the MLAs that are relevant to that portfolio or to that community or candidates, as if we're talking about a campaign. And so you are there to support the caucus as a whole, and particularly the leader's office. So it's not, you're doing this for necessarily, not every MLA has someone that's going to do tour or executive assistant or something like that.
Well, it's interesting. And as you were kind of talking, I was thinking back to a few years ago when I did national transportation policy roundtables, and that we did 6 round tables across the country, and they were in Halifax, Toronto, Montreal. Then we had the weekend off, and then we did Vancouver, Calgary, Winnipeg. But it was February, so you get a snowy day like we have today in Calgary, and it kind of changes the entire trip completely. And so we got into a situation where it was hard to get into Halifax. And then how do you get to Toronto? And then they canceled a flight. And then, so you're dealing with all those different logistics, as well as dealing with, the food at the venue and dealing with all of those different pieces. And so there's these different kind of, things that there's, to quote, the known unknowns, and there's the things that suddenly just show up. Can you think of a moment where that you can share that where suddenly things went a little awry and then you were able to kind of put it back on course and make it even better?
To your point, whether it's weather, we of course live in a country and in a province, in a city where the weather can fluctuate to extremes. And so that can change where and where you're going and how you're doing it. So, for example, if we look at today, a Monday, let's say leader will get up in the House, there'll be question period, and if let's say there was an event back down in Calgary, depending on the roads, depending on the circumstances, you may very well have to pull that down for safety reasons, of course. And because the reality is you don't want to, put anyone at risk. So weather absolutely can play a factor. The issues of the day can play a factor. I will never forget on campaign in 2023, my role was to, oversee the kind of sort of that more administration side for the leader and tour for Ms. Notley. And it was a day when everyone, it was one of those rare days on a campaign where you thought that where everyone was supposed to be able to take a bit of a breath, have a bit of downtime. And unfortunately, that was the day that neighborhoods in the north part of our province were waking up and facing the most horrific day of their lives. Wildfires had started. Right. And so the issue of the day was you now had, although it's campaign, you now have a disaster that is impacting individuals, and there is still a role of government to play in that. And so you had, emergency centers being set up, and you also had the need for the leader of the official opposition to be briefed and to be brought up to to be engaged. And especially because as premier, she of course navigated and led through the catastrophic and devastating Fort McMurray fires. So
definitely. So there's knowledge that's there.
Absolutely. And so the day went from what it was supposed to be, which was a relatively low, very, very low stress, low key day. Not very many folks were in the office, to now suddenly we need to move the leader from, at that time, Calgary, to Edmonton. And so that, of course, whether it's, transportation, who is going with the individual who needs to go with, which, there in these circumstances, there are certain people that have to be in the room or with the individual. And so you jump in. I was giving a TED Talk at the time. And so it was really quick when, you got off the TED Talk stage and you're finally allowed to have your phone back in your hand. And, basically folks are, asking, can you help, source whether it's lunch or whatever it is? And then can you come into the office? Because, we're going to have to juggle, we're going to have to basically rearrange the entire schedule, because not only does that day change,
but then every other one changes.
Everything has to shuffle, because depending on what you are doing or how the strategy, that's the other thing that plays into it. You also have to understand whether it's the campaign or political strategy, and so that can impact. And so yes, I mean, that is a moment where you have to, where you drop everything, you go into the office, you help get lunch for not just the leader, but for your team. You also, in these roles, you develop such a strong connection as a team, because you can't do it alone.
Not at all.
And you cannot, and so you rely on each other. And, and that's the other thing. Not only have I gotten to work with incredible transformational leaders over the last few years in, even though a very short period of time, unlike many others, I have also gotten to work with some of the most incredible and the hardest working political staff in Canada, without question. And so you have to work with your team. You have to collaborate. You have to be there for one another, because there is no one else. Well, I shouldn't say there's no one else. There's not many people that understand the stress and the pressure that goes into these things. And so your team, it's like your family.
Yes.
And you spend, even in a normal career, you spend more hours in the office. Politics and government is not 9 to 5.
No, far from it.
It is 24/7. You can get, you can get a text, you can get an email, you can get a phone call any time of day, any time of night, depending on if something goes on, if something happens, if something is about to happen the next day. For example, you learn of a policy that's about to be announced, and you have to scramble to coordinate a press conference. So again, venue, tech, all of those sort of logistical things.
And out of nowhere too, suddenly you're figuring that piece out.
Yeah, and and you obviously have some of those regular suspects that you would lean to in terms of finding a venue, or in some cases you reach out to your friends and maybe call in a couple of favors depending on what the circumstances are. But it's there is, again, there are the tasks that you have to do every day. Put something in a calendar, print off, meeting notes, speaking notes, stuff like that, order lunch. But that stuff is the bulk of your day is really taken up by the unknown. Right.
And fighting fires that you didn't expect you were going to fight.
Yeah. And so, and of course there is structure and, and so, but overall, in terms of your question, when things don't go as planned, that's kind of the name of the game in politics, is sometimes things never go as planned, and you have to pivot. You have to, and especially when you're on the staff side of it, your job is to keep your elected, to keep your principal, to keep the leader, to help keep your team focused and going in those high pressure moments.
Yes.
And so those little things, whether it's, getting a coffee or whatever it is that may seem mundane, in those high pressure moments, that actually could be, what, just makes things go a little bit smoother.
Fully. And it's the, making sure that all of those little pieces are going correctly, because that's what people see on the other end and might blame, someone else for that. So if those little pieces don't work out quite right, that's what people notice. And so it's so key in this role to make sure that all of those little pieces that actually take a little bit of work actually get done.
Yeah. And, the reality is nothing's ever going to be perfect.
Never.
Because we're human and it's life. But you want to be competent at your job. You want to have a really high attention to detail. The way that, I have described it is your job really is to surprise and delight in the everyday. And so, whether it is working with vendors, working with stakeholders, working with other electeds and their office, working, within the parameters and the structures that exist. There are very clear, not just guidelines. There are very clear laws that guide what you can and can't do and how you can do it. And, is it government business versus party business? And so there is, everything that you do really, really, really requires a high attention to detail, but a desire to go beyond. Because at the end of the day, we are dealing with our day-to-day can impact the life of someone. And often it does. When someone stands up to a podium and, whether it's for a press conference or a response or a rally or whatever it is, that person that is standing up there, they have so much power and influence. And so you are there to help make sure that they can deliver that, whether it's, setting up a teleprompter, or setting up a microphone or whatever it is, or working with folks to make sure that it's set up the right way. Or whether it's, going into a meeting or walking into question period or going to a community, or maybe having to, cancel on a community and the disappointment. There is such an immense amount of responsibility in these roles. And so, yeah, nothing is ever perfect. Things are going to go. Things are going to go wrong. Mistakes are going to happen. And so you should set out with the idea of, trying to surprise and delight in the everyday, high attention to detail and try not to fuck it up, essentially.
Well, and speaking from personal experience, you only have to have a mic die once to always make sure that you've got like 3 or 4 backup, batteries just in case for those moments.
Yeah, and and that's part of you have a kit that you take with you, and you do all of the you check to make sure that you've got everything that you would need and require, and you work with you work as a team, right? You oftentimes, like, this is not a one person job. These are teams usually of, you've got, usually 4 or 5 people that are on this. And so, together you are making sure, whether it's, things like batteries or whatever the case may be, is, in the kit. And usually you have a kit that is ready to go. It's no different than having a go bag for, when you're traveling frequently in your job. It's no different than having a go bag when you travel a lot in your job, which in these roles you often do. But you have to work. You have to work with your team. You have to work with your team and alongside your team, because that's how ultimately things go a little bit smoother.
Exactly. When you look at the kind of fun moments, so like you look at Stampede or one of those ones where, but you've got like 15, 20 events, throughout a day or something like that. And you've got to keep on going. But then one person really wants to talk, and then you have to kind of quietly navigate those kind of situations. Do you have ways that you kind of quietly move, your person along and then to get to the next piece? Or is there kind of a few kind of pieces that you learn along the way that
Everyone is different. At the end of the day, what works for one individual might not necessarily be what someone else, or how they want to be engaged or staffed. That's why I said it's a bit of an art and a bit of a science. Yeah. And also there's that personal, especially when you're, as what you're speaking to, which is to be, staffing and being, a body, as some might call it, to an elected in an event like a Stampede or other, high profile public events. You now not only are a face for, but you're also a face with. And so you have to, there is your ultimate responsibility is to that elected individual in that moment and in that room, and making sure that, number one, they're comfortable. Number two, that they are getting as much, time with as many folks as needed. Sometimes there are people that you have to engage with in the room and say hello to and move through. And then, of course, depending on who we're speaking about, there of course is the reality of security and working with those individuals. And so what works for, it's no different. We're all individuals. We all have,
Completely.
how do you like taking your coffee? How do you like, and so in terms of, how does someone want to be moved through? It could be leaning in and quietly, saying something into their ear. It could be anything from a very, very soft and very, very gentle, touch on the shoulder, and, a very, very, very slight pressure to kind of sort of indicate either the direction or where you want them to go. And then there are moments where you have to move them very quickly and a bit more forcefully, for whatever reason it may be. Whether, it's a schedule, they have to get up on stage, they have to get to the back of the stage, they're about to deliver remarks. You've got to get them in the vehicle because they've got to get on a plane, or whatever the case is. And then, of course, there are the moments that, you hope never come, which is, they may need to be moved for their safety, which, thankfully I have not had to experience. But in that moment, you then as the staff, you very much are diverting to their security team, and you're working in collaboration with them, and you very much are deferring to them because they are ultimately the people that are there to protect life and body. And so in terms of part of it is these roles are so deeply personal, and part of that is getting to know the person. Asking them, there is no harm in saying, hey, when we go into this room, how would you like me to, what works best for you? Number one, they appreciate it, as any human being does. At the end of the day, these are people. They're people with a lot of responsibility and a lot of power. They are people, and so asking them, having a conversation beforehand with that person, it will ultimately set you up for success, because they will have an idea of either what they think will work, or if they're very new to their role, you can, you can walk them through and give them some thoughts and ideas of like, well, are you comfortable with this? Are you comfortable with, with that? And kind of sort of ultimately you tailor it to the individual.
So when you look at kind of the last 5 years, the various different people you've worked with, is there a favorite moment that comes up, or something that truly, when you look back, you really loved?
I mean, I look back on the fact that a former premier and her team took a chance on me and gave me a chance and an opportunity to work with her and with them. And, there was never a day that I woke up and said, oh, I don't know if I feel like going in the office today. Loved absolutely every moment of it, even the high pressure and the high stakes moments. It is full of stress. It is, but again, your team, your person that you're serving, and it was a hell of a privilege and an honor to get to do that for a very short period of time with someone who is such a transformational figure, not only in Alberta, but arguably Canada. And so that's what I look back on is, it wasn't just, Ms. Notley, it was her entire team. They took a chance, they gave me a chance, and I will forever and always, remember that and be grateful for it. It's life-changing when you get the opportunity to do this. It really truly is.
Yeah.
And then, I've gotten to discover a love and appreciation for the province of Saskatchewan, working with the Honorable Carla Beck and her team during the campaign. And again, the team and the leader, you in these roles, you do become a bit of a fanatic for the individual. But part of that is because you're spending a hell of a lot of time with them. And so if you're going to spend a hell of a lot of time with an individual, you better like the person.
Yeah.
And so often, and it doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything that they do or say. In fact, that's sometimes a good thing. Not that you would do it in the moment, unless asked to. It's not unless you're in one of these roles. But I have really truly developed a respect and a gratitude, and love seems weird, but a real true affection. These women in these teams have become not just a boss, not just a colleague. In many cases, they have become a friend, a mentor. And so the other, moments that I cherish are those ones where you get to be a fly on the wall, where you get to listen, where you get to watch, and you get to learn. And there are many of those. And if you are so fortunate to have that privilege, you take those, you hold them very close. And it's transformational. And so getting to chase after, getting to run after, and put in countless hours for incredible women, whether it's the Honorable Rachel Notley, the Honorable Carla Beck, former Mayor Jyoti Gondek, that I love, being able to help champion and to help support really strong women. And of course, I've helped a really, strong man. And of course, I've also gotten the opportunity to work with some really great men, including Brian Thiessen. And so, finding myself very much in support of our current Prime Minister, and volunteering and door knocking for him and his party. So, absolutely, any chance I get to support an incredible woman is very much where my heart is. But there are also some great guys out there too.
Exactly. So if you were giving advice to anyone kind of starting their career in this area or transitioning into this area, what advice would you give them?
Well, often people are like, so, where do you go to apply? The reality is I've never necessarily applied to this role. These roles often are, you are asked to serve at the pleasure of. That is what this kind of a role is. And so, you can't necessarily wake up one day and say, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to, work. I'm going to work in tour for the premier or the prime minister or whoever it is. It is often a role that, they learn who you are through your efforts on usually campaign. That is usually where leaders start to see it. So by volunteering, by being involved is a critical step. Sometimes, of course, yes, there will be the job postings and things like that. But the best way to do it is to get involved. I spent a lot more hours and still do as a volunteer.
Yeah.
Not all of my service has been paid, and that's okay, because the reality is you don't do this job for the money. You don't even necessarily do it it's not necessarily a career.
No.
It's a moment in time. It is a moment in time that you get to serve, to do a lot, to make as much of an impact as you can, whether you are fortunate to have 4 years in government or 4 years in opposition, or whether it's a transitional year with a leader that is, coming to the end of their legacy, or whether it's a decade, serving. You ultimately are there at the pleasure of not only the person that you serve, but the voter.
Yes.
Because every 4 years, you might be out of a job. And so you have to become comfortable with the impermanence of your role and your own professional mortality in these roles. And so and that's why I say, I've spent a lot more time volunteering than I have, quote unquote, working and being paid. And you don't do this. You almost can't view this as a job, because if you just view it as another job, I would argue you shouldn't be in this, because this is such an important, these individuals, political staffers, play such an important and key role in the day-to-day of what we as the public see for these electeds. And so that is that is the advice. If you are viewing this as a job, don't do it.
Yeah.
It's no different than an elected that's viewing it as don't do it.
Yeah.
Because it's not just
Agreed.
it is not just a job. It is you are in service each and every single day. Everything you do, every action you take as staff, as elected, you are doing it not for yourself. You are doing it for, hopefully, you are doing it for, to make the world around you a little bit better, and because you have a passion for service. So my advice would be to if you find yourself wanting to make a difference and to make a change, volunteer. Get out there, volunteer on your find out who your local MLA or your local MP is. Find out what party they belong to, because that's the other thing. Some of there's a difference between elected, as I've mentioned before. There's a difference. There's separation between these two, and so find out who your local member of parliament is. Shout out to Corey Hogan for Calgary Confederation, or also Greg McLean, who is Calgary Centre. Two great folks that folks can go and look to volunteer for. Corey, of course, is the Liberal Party, and Greg is the Conservative Party. And so you would go to the party website and you would find out, okay, when are they door knocking? When are they making phone calls? When are they? You basically go to the volunteer page and find out. And of course, you see, which party best aligns with your values. And sometimes you might find that, well, kind of sort of find myself maybe in the middle, or I like both of these individuals. So you help and you support. And that's the best. And that's the great thing about volunteering.
Yeah.
And of not being a direct employee is you can go out
And you get
and
to
help and support.
learn so much different
Absolutely.
pieces.
In different areas, whether, different geographical areas, different political areas. And so, that's my shout out for that. But volunteer and get involved. And then from there, campaigns, they come around every 4 years, if not sooner, sometimes maybe a little bit longer. But, every 4 years you can count on there will be a campaign. Yes. And campaigns require people and volunteers at the heart and soul of any political campaign. And so if you put yourself out there and you go forward and volunteer, that will then, if you are so fortunate to get elected and to be given that, then of course, the people look first and foremost to who worked their ass off on the campaign, who has already shown to us that they understand the pace at which you're going. As I mentioned, this is not 9 to 5. This is 24/7, nonstop. Some will argue about, the need for balance and all of that in politics. And that's a separate conversation. The reality of the moment is that right now there really isn't much balance, and there's a lot going on in our world. So it's not 9 to 5. And so a campaign gives, the people that will ultimately help to, staff up and hire a view of folks who, okay, we think that they're going to be able to be successful in this and do a good job for us. And then from there, again, however long you serve at the pleasure and privilege of, whether that is the voter, whether that's the elected. And so whether it's a long time or a short time, you make the most of it. You go out there and you try to make as, much of an impact as you can. And then when it's, when it comes to an end, you go on, you move on to whether it's, working for a nonprofit or private sector. A lot of folks go into government relations or, whatever else comes next. But these aren't jobs. They really truly are a calling in a way.
Yes. So I've really appreciated this conversation, and thank you so much for kind of showcasing these inner sides of politics and logistics that people wouldn't think of. But I've also really appreciated just our conversations over the last few years of just, everything under the sun that we've kind of discussed. And I really appreciate you being here today.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Bryndis. Happy to chat anytime.
Sounds good. Thanks. Thank you for listening to this Zebras to Apples podcast episode. I hope you enjoyed the showcase of the fun and fascinating stories of supply chain logistics. If you like this episode, I would love it if you could give it a rating and review. For more information about this topic, you can go to zebrastoapples.com or follow Zebras to Apples on the social media platform of your choosing, whether that's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter X, Blue Sky, or LinkedIn. You can support the show on Patreon. Also, check out the show notes below. Please join me again for another episode of Zebras to Apples. Have a wonderful day.